welcome to Myths, Legends, Stories, and Tales with Lady Liadan. Today, we're going to read a more modern story, but it's a story set in a medieval period. It's called Marguerite Makes a Book, written by Bruce Robertson and illustrated by Kathryn Hewitt. Looks like it's set in France. In which we meet Marguerite, Papa Jacques, the loathsome Andre, and Master Raymond. In a small house in Paris, nearly 600 years ago, lived a man who made beautiful books. His name was Jacques the painter, but he was affectionately known as Papa Jacques, because he was the oldest and most famous book printer in all of Paris. He lived on a street in front of the great cathedral of Notre Dame, with all the other people who made and sold books. Papa Jacques' books, called manuscripts, were greatly admired because he painted or illuminated each one by hand. He had even made books for the king and queen, painting the margins with swans and lilies and brightly colored birds. But Papa Jacques was getting old. His hands sometimes trembled, and he couldn't see as well as he used to. And he was late finishing a prayer book called A Book of Hours for his patron, the Lady Isabel. One morning, Papa Jacques' only daughter, Marguerite, rose early to light the fire and prepare Papa's workshop. She set out clean brushes and oyster shells to hold the paints, then carefully placed Papa's most precious possession, his eyeglasses, on the table. She was very nervous, for today was the day that Lady Isabel's steward, Andre, would come to check on the progress of the prayer book. As she arranged Papa's work table, Marguerite began to imagine herself dressed in fine clothes and dreamed of riding in a carriage with horses, like Lady Isabel. She had glimpsed the noble lady with the kind face once as she rode by. Let's see, there's Papa getting up in the morning. There's Marguerite setting up his workshop. An impatient knock startled Marguerite out of her daydream. As Papa Jacques slowly made his way to the door, Marguerite prayed that today his hands would not tremble. "Is the book ready?" Andre demanded. "I am afraid not," Papa Jacques answered, "but there's just a little more to do." "Well, in 3 days, Lady Isabel will be celebrating her name day," Andre announced. "If it isn't ready by then," he warned, "she's not going to pay for it. That I promise. And I'll find someone else who can finish it." Papa Jacques was alarmed. "But my expenses, my materials, my time," he stammered. "Lady Isabel will tell everyone that you are too old to make books," Andre said, "and she'll be right, too." With that, he stomped out. Mamma Marie stared at the door he had slammed behind him. "We don't need his insults or his threats," she said, "but we do need the money." "Don't worry, Papa," said Marguerite. "Let me help you finish the book. There are just a few more pictures left. And I know how to do the work. I can do it." Papa Jacques looked at his daughter and shook his head. No, my dear. It's my painting they want. But come with me now on my errands. Where did I leave my list? Marguerite and Papa stepped out into the crowded, noisy street. Marguerite stayed close to her father's side, walking carefully on the slippery cobblestones, ready to catch Papa if he stumbled. They headed toward a large house directly across from the cathedral. There lived the most prosperous bookseller in Paris, Master Raymond, the libraire. I was waiting for you, said Master Raymond. I have those prayers you needed from Kathryn, the scribe, he said, handing Jacques a bundle of parchment pages. They were covered with Kathryn's beautiful writing. I hope this time he left enough space for your pictures. Get some more parchment, though, just to be safe. He paused. You know, Lady Isabel's getting anxious for her book. Did she give you the money for my expenses? Asked Papa Jacques, a note of desperation in his voice. I am afraid not, Master Raymond frowned. How are your eyes, Jacques? Marguerite glanced nervously at her father. We've come for gold leaf and powdered gold, sir, she said. It's already paid for. Raymond opened the drawer and took out a tidy stack of square pieces of paper. He fanned them open. Gold leaf, the bookseller whispered. It gleams like the sun of heaven above. Marguerite, Papa Jacques said, sounding irritated. It's time we finished our errand. Master Raymond, will you loan me a few francs until the book is finished? I thank you, sir. Papa Jacques took Marguerite's hand and led her outside. Absently, he started to walk into the street. Just at that moment, a horse-drawn cart careened around the corner, directly into Papa Jacques' path, knocking him down. Papa! Marguerite screamed. I'm all right, Marguerite, he said, getting shakily to his feet. But look, he cried. There, between two paving stones, were his glasses, bent and twisted. Oh, no. In which Marguerite meets many people in different parts of Paris. Half an hour later, Marguerite had gotten Papa back home and settled in his bed. Then, Papa's list in her hand, she set out, alone, to complete his errands. Marguerite crossed the bridge over the river Seine and walked a long way until she came to the edge of the city. There she passed through the city gate and down the road where the countryside began. Here there were no cobblestones to stumble over. Here sheep, goats, and cows were raised. Marguerite entered a dingy shed behind the farmhouse. Inside it smelled very foul. She quickly fished in her pocket for a handkerchief scented with lavender. She held it up to her nose and tried not to breathe. Hello, she called into the shadows. It's Marguerite, Jacques the painter's daughter. A bearded man emerged from a side room. It was Bernard. He was always making jokes that Marguerite didn't find very funny. Come this way, he said. She followed him into a cleaner room with a window. There she saw stacked against the walls rectangular frames as tall as she was. On them were stretched the finest, most beautiful skins of parchment. Spiral-shaped white shavings littered the floor. What are they doing? How are they is this how they make parchment? You might look that up and see how that's done. Just one calfskin, she said firmly. Nothing with holes or blemishes. This one, perhaps. Bernard laughed slightly. You seem to know what you want, don't you? Yes, said Marguerite. I do. He cut the sheet from the frame and trimmed it down so that it was an even rectangle. You probably want the scrap edges to practice on, don't you? So you can do your little drawings. Marguerite frowned at the man as he rolled up the skin. Thank you, she said, paid him, and raced out the door. Scraps to practice on, she muttered. Little drawings? She marched up the long, straight street that led back to the gate of the city. Beyond it lay the market. Marguerite pushed her way through the crowds until she found the goose and chicken stall. And what can I help you with, my dear? Asked Blanche, a red-faced woman wearing a tattered apron. I need goose feathers for Papa Jacques' pins, and a few eggs, please. Eggs for supper or mixing paints? Mixing paints. Very well, then, Blanche said. These are a few days old. They'll give you rich, thick paint. And take one of these, she added, placing a still warm, freshly laid egg in Marguerite's hand. Nice and fresh, lovely for lunch. Just then, a big goose began to hiss and squawk at Marguerite. She turned with a jump and quickly moved onto the vegetable stall nearby, where she bought fresh green parsley. Then she went to one last stall to buy honey in a little pot. I wonder what she's going to do with the honey. Marguerite crossed the bridge back over the river Seine to her own neighborhood, in the shadow of the cathedral. The streets were quieter now. She approached a house that seemed to crouch beneath the cathedral's stone gargoyles. As she entered a small room, it took a moment for Marguerite's eyes to adjust to the dim light. There was a particularly musty smell, like damp spices and moldy straw. Gradually, Marguerite began to see the withered roots and dried flowers that hung from the ceiling. A tiny white-haired woman got up from her chair. Who's there? She asked. The old woman was Ninon, the apothecary. She knew everything about herbs and cures. Marguerite loved visiting Ninon. It is me, Marguerite, Jacques the painter's daughter, she said, a little loudly. Some days Ninon did not hear very well. I have come for some dried saffron flowers, madder root, and a cake of vermilion, some wax, pine pitch, and some lapis lazuli stone. Lapis lazuli stone, Ninon shuffled across to a drawer and pulled out a handful of small dark blue rocks. These are my last ones, she said softly. To think, these came from over the mountains and deserts, across rivers. Ninon tucked the roots and stones and everything else into Marguerite's basket. It looks like your father is going to make a very fine book indeed, she said. Then she waved Marguerite away. Marguerite sets to work. As soon as she got home, Marguerite lit the fire and set a small pot of water to boil and unpacked her basket. Then she set to work. The first part was easy. She would need a quill and ink to draw with. She shaped a goose quill with a knife until the end was very sharp and yet flexible. Then she scraped some soot off the wall of the fireplace and mixed it with glue in an oyster shell. Soon she had rich black ink. Marguerite started to draw with swift, delicate strokes. Bouquets after bouquets of blooming flowers and a nesting bird began to emerge from the margins of the manuscript. See, she's shaping the pen there. She's mixing the ink. And look, she's drawing. How pretty. Gold leaf came next. In another oyster shell, Marguerite mixed chalk powder, glue, and a drop of honey. Then, in the margins, she carefully dabbed dots of the mixture and let them dry. Slowly, she picked up a shimmering square of gold leaf, breathed on the dots of glue to warm them, then laid the square over the dots where the gold did not stick. She brushed the gold leaf away. Then, with Papa's smooth burnishing stone, she polished the dots of gold leaf to a brilliant shine, like the sun of heaven above, as Master Raymond had whispered. Now she was ready to mix her colors. She began with very simple yet extremely important step. She broke one of the eggs that Blanche had given her. She separated out the yolk and beat the egg white in a clean bowl until it became foamy. Then she set the bowl aside to let the liquid settle. Next she would need 5 colors: deep red, yellow, green, bright red, and blue. First, Marguerite put the red roots from the madder plant into the pot of boiling water. The water immediately turned a deep red, the same red she always thought as the stained glass windows of Notre Dame. She added egg white to the red liquid to make paint that flowed easily off her brush. Green came next. She crushed a handful of fresh parsley until a deep green juice came out. This too she mixed with egg white to create paint that was just thick enough. Now for yellow, which came from dried saffron flowers. She placed the crushed flowers into a little cloth bag and laid the bag in a small dish of egg white. The yellow color seeped out of the bag and into the egg white, making a nice thin paint. Then bright red. Using a mortar and pestle, Marguerite broke up a cake of vermilion, grinding it into powder before she mixed the powder with the egg. Finally, the most beautiful of all, blue. She made a ball from the wax and pine pitch, into which she mixed the crushed up powdered lapis lazuli. Dropping the ball into a bowl of warm water, she stirred gently and watched very closely, almost like magic. The finest, bluest particles of the lapis lazuli slowly began to emerge from the ball, turning the water blue. Marguerite waited for the blue particles to settle to the bottom of the bowl. Then she carefully poured off the clear water. There, at the bottom, was pure blue. When mixed with some egg white, the paint was the color of the Virgin Mary's robe, the color of heaven itself. Now, Marguerite was ready to paint. That was a lot of work, wasn't it? Ooh, wow, what a pretty page. She started by painting the flowers in the margins of the parchment page. She smiled to herself as she decided to make the flowers her flowers. The daisies, known as Marguerites, using the dried saffron flower mixture, she painted the centers of the daisies bright yellow. Around the edges of the white petals, she painted yellow shadows. Using the crushed parsley mixture, she painted the leaves and stems of Marguerite's bright green. She leaned back to look at her work. The petals and leaves looked as though they were twisting and bending in the wind. She was pleased. Marguerite had drawn the nesting birds in the margins. Now, using the precious lapis lazuli, she began to fill their outlines in a brilliant blue. The afternoon was beginning to slip away, and Marguerite had to squint slightly in the changing light. No wonder Papa needs glasses, she thought, brushing back a strand of hair that had fallen into her eyes. Her hands made exact, delicate movements over the page. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't even notice when her cat, Gabrielle, jumped onto the table behind her and began to play with a string. Uh-oh. There's your kitty. But what she wanted to do most of all was to complete the portrait of the Lady Isabel that Papa had already begun. In black ink, he had drawn the outline of a lady kneeling before a prayer book. Marguerite painstakingly began to fill in Papa's drawing, beginning with the Lady Isabel's robe. She decided it would be bright vermilion red, like the dress she had once seen in the noble lady wear. Using the much darker red from the crushed madder fruit, she painted in the shadows of the gown. As a finishing touch, she traced fine gold lines along the folds of the dress, making them sparkle in the light, just as Papa did. Suddenly, Marguerite heard someone at the door. She glanced outside the window and was startled to see that dusk was beginning to fall. How many hours had passed since she had started painting? Then she heard a booming voice. It was Andre. A surprise. The door opened, and an unhappy-looking Papa and a smug Andre walked into the workroom. "Marguerite, what is this?" asked Papa. Just as she was about to speak, a finely dressed noblewoman entered the room. Marguerite recognized her at once. It was the Lady Isabel. Papa Jacques looked at his workbench and saw all of the finished pages drying. He looked nervously at his patron, but to his surprise, the noble lady smiled. Lady Isabel studied the painted pages, lingering over one page in particular. It was an image of herself in a beautiful red robe with golden hair like that of an angel, surrounded by a border of Marguerite daisies. "These are my favorite flowers," she said, clearly delighted. What was Andre so worried about? At these words, Andre's face fell. When the pages are in their velvet covers, nothing will be more beautiful." Amazed, Papa Jacques looked at his daughter, his eyes fixed on her beaming face. "You have done well, Master Jacques, and I am very pleased," Lady Isabel said. "And who is this lovely young lady, with a brush in her hand? Why, this is my most talented assistant," Papa Jacques announced with pride. "My daughter, Marguerite." "Well, if she helped you with this book, then she does you very proud, Master Jacques," Lady Isabel said. She started to leave, then stopped, and turned around. "I think I know who added those daisies." She swept from the room, Andre trailing miserably at her heels. With that, Papa's and Marguerite's work was sold to the noble Lady Isabel, and Papa kept his reputation as the finest painter of illuminated manuscripts in all of Paris, with his finest apprentice. What did you think of the book? Did you think Marguerite did a good job? It was nice of her to help her father, don't you think? You might check out a series of calligraphy and illumination videos on Lady Liadan's Learning Library, or other places on YouTube, and try your hand at illuminating the manuscript. That's all the time we have for today. We'll see you next time.